Right, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the regular Assembly Housing and Homelessness Committee meeting. Today is Wednesday, September 20th. We're noticed from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. here at City Hall, room 155. We don't have much on our agenda today in terms of the number of topics, but a lot to discuss, especially with regard to emergency cold weather shelter. This is our last scheduled meeting to see where we are before we start seeing contracts, grants, whatever form they take, come to the full assembly for approval. To let some staff off the hook so they don't have to stay for the entire meeting, we are going to be discussing the mitigation appropriation first before we go into the winter shelter plan. So that adjustment to the agenda is going to be happening. Moving on to, I forgot to do introduction. So if we can start with assembly member introductions here.
Cameron Perez-Verdia.
Karen Bronga.
Kevin Cross.
Anna Brawley.
Christopher Constant.
Felix Rivera. And then do we have any assembly members on the phone? Okay, other folks will introduce themselves as we go through the agenda. Next we have initial audience participation. We have 2 people signed up. We're going to start with Mr. Oliva. If you can come up, if you can just pull up a chair, use that mic right there. I will set 3 minutes on my phone. Welcome.
Don't start the clock, Felix. Okay, I requested a clock so I could see it, and it's inhibiting to any presenter who speaks and
Thank you.
not
So at
watch.
this point, I am going to start the clock.
Oh, okay. Well, you can start the clock. I've requested you get a clock so the presenter can see it so you don't cut them off and they're unable to summarize, which by watching the clock, they would be able to do that. So I believe that's inhibiting, if not restricting, the right to present the issues that are before us. So if you need money to buy the clock, I will offer financial assistance to do it. Now, my name is Ron Oliva. I probably have appeared before the assembly and meetings more than any other person, and I believe I'm an expert in the homeless issue in all categories of it. My background is I'm a graduate of the University of Wisconsin. I attended the University of Alaska in planning. I've attended the University of Wisconsin Law School. And I think my expertise of being next to a homeless shelter for over 40 years, I understand the issues. The war drums are sounding. I go to all the community council meetings that I can attend, and this community is split. And unfortunately, Felix, if you were at the last Rogers Park Community Council, 6 left. The Midtown Community Council, a longtime established resident, said, we got to get rid of the carrot. And he didn't say break out the stick. He said break out the club over lawlessness. Mr. Constant made quite a spiel about the condition of what he tried to prevent, but it came back worse, which is the old Native Hospital site. And for some reason, Carlick Street got abated, which turned into a 1-lane because of the tents on both sides. Now, I suffered the most. I can document $2 million in losses. Midtown registered $1.5 million. I asked for a raise for our policemen, for our first responders, and Parks and Rec, because we're requiring them to go into a war zone. That's not part of their duties and responsibilities to put them in harm's way. They're hired to protect and serve and also maintain our parks and recreational areas, not
Mr.
to go
Oliva,
into a hazmat zone.
I've paused your time just to let you know you have 30 seconds left. Please
Well,
continue.
thank you very much. Add 5 for the pause. So in summary, some of you have taken a tour of truth and witnessed the devastation that you, Felix, and maybe Chris, and this committee may call successes. But for the rate of return that you're getting, I think there's a lower letter than an F for the results that you're getting. And it's shameful that you don't follow the money and be held accountable for it. So in summary, I would like my money by you purchasing my property, or give me the money to make up the difference. And for this year, forgive the taxes that I'm late on and my properties are in foreclosure.
Thank you, Mr. Leva. Your time is up.
Thank
I
you.
don't
And
see
Felix,
any-
I can always ask, and I know your minds are
Thank you,
made
Mr.
up.
Leva. Your time
And
is
I
up,
didn't
but
want
don't
to
see any
confuse it with
questions for
facts,
you.
but does anyone have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Leva. I do not see any questions for you. Thank you.
Please get me the money. Just sign the check. I'll fill in the numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Leva. I'm going to go ahead and call up Mr. Smith. You'll have 3 minutes, just the same as Mr. Leva. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Harrison Smith. I'm an Anchorage resident, live in Turnagain neighborhood. So I'm here today to talk about somebody else, somebody I know named Apollo, and some of you folks may know him. He's also known as the guy with the trucks, and I have some information about him and the project that he is working on. So since I've learned about our friend Apollo, and the lengths he has gone to help those who are unhoused in the city, and the work he has done on the ground at the 3rd Avenue camp, if you don't know about him, you'll know about him soon. We talk about wanting solutions. Sometimes they are closer than we realize, but we have to be open to them. One of our goals, like every city, is to increase the value of properties, in part by making the city a nicer place to live, but we can't have it both ways. If we have the comfort of sitting on an asset that appreciates greater than inflation, we have to tolerate the ways that those without that luxury are just trying to survive. We need more people finding shelter in creative ways, whether that is living in a recycled and converted fire truck or city bus. Are we really going to say, no, you have to stay out in the cold? What I see is that people are trying to climb out with what tools they have, and they are being told, no, that's not allowed because it doesn't look like the way we expect or like. It's not neat and tidy. The more we insist on neat and tidy, the more we in effect say you have zero options. I understand housing insecurity even from my relatively secure position. My mobile home space rent is increasing 33% over 6 months with zero improvements. It's now more than a house I rented a couple years ago. I haven't found an answer for my neighbors living on Social Security, but we'll get to that topic at another point. I have heard about the harassment my friend Apollo has received, just like those without homes. Not to implicate anybody in this room, but I've heard in many places homelessness described as a decision, as a moral failing. There are many decisions involved, but they are not made freely. People are displaced as a result of many factors, but those do not exclude our political and economic choices and priorities. We cannot afford to look this gift in the mouth. Temperatures have dropped below 40. Hypothermia is already a risk. In a matter of weeks, there will be snow on the ground. I encourage this
Just
body.
pause your time,
Yep.
just to let you know you have 30 seconds
Okay.
left.
I encourage this body to work with any and every person, offering a way that one less person will be left outdoors. Otherwise, is our goal really what we say it is? And if this is the first you've heard of this person, Apollo, and the work he's doing, I encourage you to talk to him, hear his story, learn about his ideas. His work gives me more hope than most things I've heard recently. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I don't see any questions for you. As always, I'm going to do my best to fit in other folks who want to speak during final audience participation. And as always, that is a first come, first serve situation. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to our agenda topics. First, we have the update on mitigation appropriations. So on September 5th, a couple weeks ago now, the Assembly appropriated $220,000 to help with mitigation at large encampments. So I wanted to see if we can get an update today from APD, Parks and Rec, and the Health Department on implementation of that appropriation. Let's go ahead and start with APD.
Good morning, Mike Curl here, Chief of Police. Sean Case is here as well, the Deputy Chief. So the appropriation that we have, we're using it for a regular detail. We have 1 sergeant and 4 officers who are going to many of the parks. They're concentrating at 3rd and Inger right now. They're also going to go to Chasno Park. They're going to go to Cuddy Family Park and the archive site. They'll be offset by overtime to backfill those positions. We also have an additional overtime detail of 3 to 4 patrol officers from various shifts, and their days and times will offset the regular detail that we're doing. And that'll be overtime, so we have a good presence in the at the different campsites. The purpose of this detail, it's not to provide security, it's to do police work. Our main goal is a lot of community policing. We're establishing a rapport with the citizens in the various camps. We're trying to gain a baseline understanding of what the needs of the people in the camps are from not only the police department, but from other agencies here in the city. Obviously, we'll investigate crimes that happen when we're present in the camp and crimes that are reported when we're not present in the camp. And the most important thing that we've been doing is we're identifying the citizens who are causing the problems in the camp, along with where they reside and what we can do to get them out of there, what steps we can take to make the vulnerable population in there from being victimized for a second time other than that. So those are our main goals. That's what we're doing. We've been there for a week. I'll let Deputy Chief Case talk a little bit about what they've done in the week that they've been operating. We're just going to concentrate on 3rd and Inger here, but we have been to Cuddy Family Park, the archive site in Chasno Park. What this does also, it frees up our CAP team to be able to respond to other areas where they normally would have been going to a lot of these campsites.
Mr. Chair, just we're getting daily updates at the activities that the overtime detail is doing. So we've been there since the 11th, so a week ago last Monday. So we're solidly into week 2. Again, 7 to 8 week coverage. We started day 1 with 3 arrests right off the bat when we went into the camp. But on the other end of the spectrum, we also, are having conversations with the folks that are camping, and just having conversations about who wants to be housed, who's ready to be housed. Things it's not really our job, but it's part of the conversation. So it's not just that we're going in and arresting folks. We're kind of trying to cover the entire gamut and work with some of the other entities that are in the park as well. And we're currently conducting several investigations that are a little bit longer term investigations as well that we've developed. And so I think long term wise, over the course of these roughly 40 days, you're going to see a pretty significant impact. Our calls for service over the first week has remained about the same. Our officer initiated activity has more than doubled. So we've got a lot of activity that we're doing inside the camp.
Great. Thank you so much, Chief and DC. So go ahead, open it up for questions for APD, and then we'll move on to Parks and Rec, and then hear last from AHD. So I have myself in the queue. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I think this is, for my part, exactly what the Assembly envisioned when we appropriated those funds. Just curious on, it sounds to me like APD is taking on more of that kind of liaison role that I envisioned with the appropriation, which is great. How is that information getting communicated to service providers? Is it getting communicated to service providers? Just want to make sure that communication, it just isn't stopping with APD.
One thing we've noticed is a lot of the service providers know when we're going there. I think there's been communication there, and they're actually showing up there because they feel safer when the police are there. So I think we've seen an increase in the service providers actually going there, feeling more comfortable, and to be able to provide services to the people who are there.
Great, thank you. Ms. Branga?
So it's come up a few times that, from the incident I spoke with you about that has nothing to do with people experiencing homelessness, but that you can't just ask to see IDs. And I'm just wondering where that comes from. So we hear there's a pretty decent criminal element in some of these camps. And to know who they are, I would say it'd be easy to look at an ID. But can you explain why you're not allowed to just ask for an ID?
In the state of Alaska, you don't have a legal obligation to identify yourself to law enforcement unless there's some legal reason. Generally falls under probable cause, reasonable suspicion, investigating a crime. So just kind of walking through the park and saying, ma'am, step over here, give me your ID. Legally, we're not allowed to do that in the state of Alaska.
Now, we can't order you to. But I can walk up to you and say, hello, ma'am, how you doing? Nice afternoon. Would you mind if I see your ID card? So there's ways to do it. And that's usually how we do. We try not to go in with a hammer. We try to be very friendly and do that. So we are identifying a lot of the people. We're identifying the campsites. I think one of the lessons we need to learn from this, if we ever do decide to go to a organized camping anywhere, we need to control where people are. We can't just let people come in and set up anywhere. We need to establish locations for them that are neat and clean, that, hey, this is your site, instead of just letting them set up anywhere. That way there's a little bit of an organization, so that when the biggest incident we're running into now, the biggest problem is it's so dark, we're still waiting for lighting to get at the campsites. We're actually having to escort the medic rigs in because we don't want people to get run over in the camps when we're going to medic assist and stuff like that. But to answer your question, even though unless you're committing a crime, we can't ask for ID, we can't demand their ID. There's nothing prevents us from asking for their IDs.
So I hear pretty often that Railroad Hill is the super violent, dangerous area. Is that part of Third Avenue? I actually don't know what people mean by Railroad Hill. And are you patrolling that?
That's not part of the Third and Ingrid campsite, but it is part of the area that we're looking into. And a lot of the shots fired call, we figured out they're actually not coming from the campsite itself at Third and Ingrid. They're coming from elsewhere, and we're still trying to track that down to the exact location. So that is part of the area we are looking at.
Thank you. I have two other members in the queue for you, Mr. Constant, then Ms. Brawley.
Thanks. I recently had an opportunity to speak with a friend who serves on one of those medic rigs. And while I appreciate the concern for not running people over, there's another concern that I've heard about, that there are medics providing medical attention in critical circumstances with their backs exposed to a crowd of onlookers, meaning they're afraid for their safety and no one has their back. And so I think there's a second kind of part of that conversation about what the value of having your folks there at this kind of wild time, because if our medics are feeling insecure for being in that space, it's going to create additional problems. And so I just let you know that that's something I'm hearing, and I would like you to think about what that might look like or how it might look. Second, I just want to say that there is a difference of opinion between the testifier who came to speak about this man Apollo's kind of so-called effort to help, in which he's bringing in large vehicles that are junk vehicles and dropping them there, creating an environment where some people on the other side of this conversation feel like it's an abuse of the space and the neighborhood to create effectively a junkyard on that site of big, heavy equipment. And so I do appreciate that APD is trying to navigate all of that with the municipal attorney, and know that at least from the folks who have to live in that area and who have had this land on them, they're not really okay with that becoming Anchorage's repository for junk vehicles.
Thank you. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. I want to come back to a couple questions about, describing or characterizing criminal activity that is happening at sites like Third and Ingra. So first, I want to say I appreciate, for example, pointing out that the shots fired that somebody had called in were not coming from the camp, and I think generally there's a lot of maybe public confusion or different perceptions of how much there is a Venn diagram, the two overlapping circles between people experiencing homelessness and people engaging in criminal activity. And by criminal activity, I don't just mean, that they don't have legally a place to be and so they are violating the law. I mean, specific harms to other people. So two questions. One, I'm wondering if you could characterize, based on what you know, what rough percentage or share of people who are present in the camps, at that site, just say Third and Ingra as the example, are actually engaged in criminal activity versus people who are camping there. And so there may be people who are camping there and engaged in criminal activity. There may be folks who are there physically present on that site, but not camping there. So I'm just trying to untangle those two populations because I believe they're related. I don't believe that they're the same population. And I think there's a lot of public confusion around that. So that's one question. What is the share? And then of the criminal activity, how much of it would you characterize as organized crime or gang activity as opposed to what you might call low-level crime, subsistence-related crime, which is, shoplifting because you can't afford food, for example. I'm just trying to kind of understand, because I think there's a lot of misperception or lack of understanding about what's actually happening there and who's doing it. Thanks.
This is going to be a wild guess.
So I think overall, it's fair to characterize the majority of folks that are camping at Third and Ingra as good people, homeless people, right? They're camping there because they don't have another place to go. I think it would be an unfair to say that there's just the majority of them are criminals. I don't think that's accurate. The percentage that are causing the most of the criminal activity is relatively small. And then you also have a population that has, like what you described as subsistence type of crimes, which are a concern for us, but it's, is there human trafficking there? There's a lot of drug activity. It's kind of odd that there's not a lot of alcohol stuff going on, but a lot of drug use going on. The first week we were there, we administered Narcan twice, one successfully and one not successfully. So that's a concern with a portion of the campers, and then you've got the assault end of things and the violent, robbery assault end of things as well, which again are a little bit lower. But when you have a concentrated population in an area and you've got a couple of assaults happening, or a robbery or two happening, or an overdose, that generally causes the kind of the chaos that follows that to be exponentially felt throughout the community. So we think it's a smaller amount that's doing the violent crime. Finding that is what we're working through right now.
And just to briefly follow up, because I've heard anecdotally there's, quote unquote gang activity, or I guess that's why I'm asking about organized crime. Does it seem to be people who are working together, or is it kind of more opportunistic, separate actors?
There does appear, and I'm jumping on a ledge here a little bit, but there does appear that there are a couple pockets of multiple people that are working together. I'm not going to use the word gang, but multiple people working together.
And just a brief follow-up. Yeah, thank you. And again, my intent is to not minimize the public safety concerns, the fact that there is crime happening in those areas, but I think it does everybody well to be very clear and to continue to say these are there's different things happening in the same place, I guess, and it does affect the people who are there. So again, I just want to make sure that we're always clear in that conversation. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Don't see any other questions for APD. Thank you. We'll move on to Parks and Rec.
Mike Braniff, Parks and Recreation. So with the funding that was allocated to our department, our plan is to continue to staff Healthy Spaces cleanup team at the summer level as we go into fall and into winter. And we'll continue to do that until the funding is exhausted or until the calendar year ends. I'm certain we can make good use of the funding and we'll utilize it all. But yeah, that's the plan.
Great. Any questions for Parks and Rec? All right. I will just say, just appreciate Parks and Rec going out and offering that service. I know I have emailed Parks and Rec several times about constituent complaints about cleaning, whether it's bridges or other issues. So I really appreciate the work that your crew does. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the Anchorage Health. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ms. Branca.
So is the Healthy Spaces group, are you providing the lighting? And if you are, what's the holdup on the lighting at the camps?
We are not providing the lighting. So yeah, I think we got maybe some homework to do here to touch on that, but we are not.
Thanks. All right, and
Wait, Mr. Chair.
go ahead, Mr.
I
Constant.
just think that brings up a question for the manager who's here. Do you know who is going to be organizing the effort to get the lighting out there at 3rd Avenue? Lighting is such a topic between us right now.
Lighting is a topic. At this point, I don't.
Okay.
But I will find out.
Yeah, that would be real nice for us to understand who has that in their wheelhouse so we can help if we need.
Great, thanks for that. All right, we're going to go ahead and just want to note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Voland, and then we'll move on to Anchorage Health Department.
Good morning, everyone. Alexis Johnson, Anchorage Health Department. AHD will be utilizing the funding to continue to have bathrooms on site and hand washing stations. I just want to note for the record that on October 1st, all hand washing stations will be pulled because they can't put in antifreeze into the hand washing station, so the water will freeze, and so they don't want to ruin those units. The bathrooms will be pulled before freezing as well. So that's just for the record. And then we will be utilizing the remaining of the funding to do outreach staffing overtime. So our outreach team at AHD plans to work overtime during emergency cold weather shelter season. And then we'll be utilizing the funds for transportation to shelters and outreach items while the camps are being demobbed.
Great, thank you. I guess just a question from me on restrooms, because that was a critical issue that I brought up because I continue to receive complaints about restrooms because people got to go somewhere. Are we still continuing to hear any complaints about restrooms? Are they, and especially one of them, the complaints that I heard was about restrooms being full and being left full for a while. So are we able to deal with that quickly?
Mike Braniff, Parks and Rec. So I speak frequently with the owner of the contractor that provides our porta potties, and they're challenged to keep up with the use and the wear and tear on the units. I spoke with him just before the meeting here today, and he informed me that the hand washing stations he wants to remove on October 1st. He needs to remove them before it freezes or they freeze. And he'd like to remove the porta potties before it freezes, but it's less critical with those because you won't do damage to them. You just won't be able to clean them thoroughly. And so we're just going to monitor the weather. And I think it might be mid-October that he wants to remove those. And I think that it is worth noting that we have porta potties at park locations throughout the winter, but the use pattern is different, and the condition we see the porta potties in is different. And I think without running water to be able to clean the insides of the units, I understand where he's coming from. So
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, I just want to put out to the public, to the manager, to Mr. Braniff, that at least a couple of us are working on a project to send to the voters a question about permanent portables. The Portland Lou, a substantial bond question. So I just want you to know that that is coming forward of our own accord. We're doing that to make sure that we come up with a permanent resolution to this issue of portable bathrooms and bathrooms across the community, not just for camps, but for public spaces in general.
Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing anyone else. Thank you all so much for the update. I'm very pleased with the work that the departments have been doing. So we're going to go ahead and move on our agenda to the 2023-2024 Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Plan. So this is the main topic for this meeting. So this committee and the Anchorage Health Department have been working diligently since about June to make sure that we are prepared for the winter. Obviously, it's getting really cold at night and in the mornings. Some places have gotten their first frost this week. My house hasn't yet. So it's important to make sure that we are on track, if not ahead of schedule, to get our winter shelter stood up really as soon as we can. The Assembly has appropriated the money, so approximately 4.4 million minus a bit with some amendments that were made on the floor, and then another 957,000 that's going to be coming up at our next Assembly meeting, which might go up a little bit depending on some numbers being run. So now it's time to see how that money is going to be spent. So with that, let's turn it over to the Anchorage Health Department for their presentation. Go ahead.
Alexis Johnson, Anchorage Health Department. Today, I will be presenting our 2023-2024 Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Plan. Next slide, please. So today, we're going to be talking about the non-congregate ITB, a congregate location exploration, the funding that has been appropriated, and of course, everyone's hot topic, which is the demobbing of camps. So next slide, please. Okay, so currently we have a ITB out through purchasing for a non-congregate location and a congregate location. This was posted on Friday, September 15th, and it has to stay on the streets for 14 days. We did put out an initial RFI, or request for information, for any providers to come forth and say, yes, we would like to participate in the procurement process for emergency cold weather shelter. When that RFI closed, we were under the assumption that we had about 302 viable non-congregate facility beds available. After discussions with those providers, we believe that we'll have 272 beds at one location, 100 beds at another location, and then up to 150 beds at a congregate site that we're going to talk about a little later. So this gives us a total of up to 522 beds. Without the location 3, which is the congregate location we'll discuss, we will have a delta. We'll be at 372 beds. So we'll need to make up to get to that 400 to 450 number. If facilities are still interested for bidding on congregate or non-congregate facilities, they can do that right now on the purchasing website. Did we want to take questions per slide?
Yeah, we'll do that. Are you done with this slide?
Yes, sir.
All right, Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. When we had the RFI close, I thought there were 4 locations that responded.
Through the chair to Mr. Constant, we did have 4 locations. One of them we deemed, I shouldn't say ineligible, but at the time they were not able to receive municipal funding for a specific type of sheltering and then transferred to this type of sheltering. So they've been funded for a specific location as that type of sheltering. And so we can't utilize 2 pots of money for that one location. And then the second location, we've been engaging with them, but at that time they did not have a sprinkler system and they were needing fire watch. And there was also some questions about, it was currently, they currently had residents in the facility.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
So I have myself next in the queue. First off, just because I might be asking some questions to you, depending on answers, is there a representative from the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness at the meeting? Well, dang. All right. I guess first question is, what assumptions are you making on double occupancy?
So through the chair to Mr. Rivera, the first location is a historic provider that has provided for emergency cold weather sheltering. The reason that we can't announce them as the location is because the ITB is still open and we haven't gone through the formal procurement process and awarded these bids. It's our assumption that they will be awarded because they do have, they've been historic providers, they're geared up, they're staffed up, ready to go. So this is double occupancy rooms. So 272 beds, half the number of rooms.
Got it. So you're making an assumption of 100% double occupancy.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be curious to just, with the coalition, to just double check if that's a good assumption for us to be making or not. Do we have a dollar figure yet for cost for these?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, we budget $100 per person per day. The ITB has not closed, so we do not know the actual financial cost, what they're planning to ask for.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think one of the goals that we had, especially with planning early and doing all of this work, is to see if we can try to get some reductions in costs, because $100 per person per day, a little bit high. I get that it's probably about average, but it'd be great if we can try to reduce that. Is the health department considering set aside for repairs? Because I know that's something that was budgeted last emergency cold weather shelter. So are we doing that this year, and what's that dollar figure?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, I'm going to have Tamaya with the health department answer that.
Miley Versbach, Anchorage Health Department. So actually the $100 per person per day includes the damages that we've seen. And so absolutely when a provider bids, the scope of work does include that they can submit damages and be reimbursed.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And then I'll leave my last question for later.
Yeah,
Maybe.
that raises
go ahead,
another
Mr. Constant.
question. Thank you. So we have budgeted $100 per person today per day, so we don't anticipate the bids will come out at that amount if we're offering reimbursement, or are we saying within your budget you have to fund reimbursement out of these expenses?
So the budget amount is looking at how much overall historically has it cost us per person per day. And that cost includes those reimbursements for damages that we've paid. When they bid, they're bidding on just providing like the room per person per day. And then above that, we will put money in the contract for what we estimate damages to look like based on the historic knowledge that we have. It's difficult to ask them to put as part of their bid, what do you think the damages will be?
Yeah, I understand that. So I am curious how an ITB process will work then. As they all hear this, they're going to bid $100 a day per person. And so I think that, like Mr. Rivera said, there might have to be some negotiating because these are good terms. Even these hotels are empty for the winter. So this is just pure profit if you think about it on the back end of their annual season, which is ending.
And through the chair to Mr. Constant, we have historic records, and these have been good partners to us for
Okay.
many years. And so it's our assumption that they would continue to be good partners, and that we wouldn't get into a situation where there would be price gouging.
Thanks.
I actually have a couple more folks in the queue. And just for a quick note, thank you to the folks from the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness who are listening. Apparently, several of them are in DC advocating for us. So I appreciate them doing that. So first we have Ms. Brawley, then Ms. Bronca.
Yeah, just briefly, the question about double occupancy. I wondered, what was the percent do you guys have of double occupancy the last couple years that we've used hotels for shelter, non-congregate?
Through the chair to Ms. Brawley, I can speak more specifically to the Alex Hotel. We were at full double occupancy with the exception of 1 or 2 rooms last year for the whole emergency cold weather season. And then as well as the Aviator, we were pretty full. There was a few onesie twosie single rooms, but most of the time they were doubled up.
That's good to know. And I just want to note, I think that is an efficient use. And of course, there'll be people who, want to room together or couples, whatever it is. But also, I just want to flag that if there are issues, of course, then somebody might get kicked out. So I also don't want to create a situation where incompatible folks are paired together. But I appreciate you looking at the cost savings. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Bronca.
So one of the, I heard recently about a fire started on a bed in one of the shelter locations, emergency cold weather I think it was last year, and it took out 6 rooms or maybe even more. I would think the $100 a day, with that kind of damage wouldn't cover it. And hopefully, do you think it would cover a fire like that again?
Well, that number is based on what those costs were last year. So that damage is included in those costs.
Thanks.
Briefly, I have. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cross.
Yeah, one question and one more of a thought exercise. So the first one is regarding when we contract out with these hotels or these housing units. Does that, whatever the base rate is for the room, are there additional services? Are we also having to come out for management, laundry, external things, or are they including a lot of those services within that bid? One of my concerns was with previous, when we would go in and lease out a hotel, they were leasing out at a room rate, but then we were also hiring management and stuff on top of it. So it's like, if they're charging us market, but then we're taking on all these other burdens that normally are included with that service, then it's not such a good deal. Does that make sense? So maybe you can talk about what is all included at a base rate.
Yes, sir. Through the chair to Mr. Cross. Yes. So in the rate that we've seen historically, there was 2 non-congregate facilities last year. They operated differently under their contractual obligations. So the Aviator, we paid a base rate to them. They subcontracted to a supportive service, and they included food within that cost. Separate from that, we had the Alex Hotel. We master leased that facility at a lower rate than the $100, and then we contracted with Henning to run the facility and include food in their contract. So we've had facilities where they've done like a all-encompassing contract for food, social services, and the housing. And then we've also had facilities like the Alex where it's just the housing, and then we go into contract with a service provider to provide food and support.
And the next thing I just want to put in perspective is, I had a friend who was in between apartments and was struggling to find a place. And we sat down and we kind of did a budget. And I was like, hey, let me see what I can do to help you out. And I discovered that the rooms that they were renting out just on a daily basis were anywhere from, $50 to $70 a night, what they were finding. They couldn't really stick to a refrigerator. They have to find 3 days here, 3 days there, so they could find a long-term rental. When we got done doing the math, it was costing them about $4,000 a month because you can't buy bulk. You can't do anything if you don't know where you're going to go. You can only stay for 3 days till you find another place. Transportation costs, everything. And the epiphany of doing the math of being in that transitional period, I mean, you would think it's inexpensive. It's not. It's tremendously expensive because how do you save? Where do you put stuff? You got to get a storage unit. There's all this additional expense. And I thought it was going to be a simple exercise, like, here's what we're going to do, and I'm just going to help. And then I just realized it's like, well, how do you dig yourself out of this hole? Like, if you don't know where you're going to be in 3 to 4 days, where do you store your stuff? You can't go get a cooler. You're going to drag a cooler around. And I just said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. And I had to, to help out. But it was very interesting. So even at $100 a day, when you look at the cost to actually try to survive if you don't have permanent residence, it's much, much higher, much higher. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. And Mr. Cross, I just have to say the numbers you just presented highlight exactly why Housing First has become the model of choice, well beyond transitional housing, well beyond short-term housing, permanent supportive housing, because the costs are extraordinary when you are circulating in a temporary environment day in and day out, whether that's cost to the individual, cost to the system, costs in every direction. I think you just perfectly highlighted the rationale of why, in the end, Housing First is the only thing. Give them a house is cheaper than watch them run all over, and then figure out how to get them into a place or have a funding source to pay for that housing, because HUD will in fact pay for permanent housing. They won't pay for shelter or transitional housing. And so they've moved away. Like, we used to, the place I work, operate transitional housing. They won't fund it anymore because it's too expensive. So, and I just wanted to speak to the argument of fire damage. It's interesting because I'm certain that the operator had insurance, and I think probably the costs to mitigate are much less with insurance, because we would just pay some damage portion to make sure their insurance rates don't spike, but we wouldn't actually be on the hook to cover all of those expenses, because any of these operations we would require, they have fire suppression and insurance. And so I just want to put that on the record.
Thanks. Don't see any other questions. Please continue.
All right. So currently underway, our Anchorage Health Department outreach is working with social service providers to figure out which campers are planning to seek shelter this winter. We plan to work with outreach workers and the coalition to conduct surveys at the camps and to find the facility that we and with the client believe would fit best for their needs. We know that some people aren't going to fare well in a non-congregate setting. And so we are working with those clients and their individualized needs to figure out which facility would be best for them, and to also mitigate any problems at those facilities. We plan to give proper notice to all campers at the 4 main campsites. That shelter is planning to be open mid-month, and to get them on the phone lines or meeting with outreach workers to get them into the system, registered into the system for movement. And so our priority is to work with the clients at 3rd and Ingra encampment. Our outreach workers are out there right now talking with people. We're also going to look at Chauncey, Cuddy, and Davis, getting those large encampments into shelter for the winter. It's our goal to get Third and Ingra posted and closed and to move all clients out of that encampment into housing and into shelter. Third and Ingra is our first priority.
Thanks. So just a quick question from me. So I'm not opposed to anything stated on this slide, but I just want to just make sure, because we have folks who are probably listening who are just waiting for those keywords and thinking about lawsuits. Have we, when it comes to the posting of the zone abatement at Third and Ingra, has legal weighed into that, and just to make sure that we're all kosher?
Yes, through the chair, we've been working with legal. It's obviously our advisement to follow Martin v. Boise. We plan to post when shelter space is available. That shelter space will need to remain available through the 10 days of the zone abatement posting. And then during the abatement process, shelter space will have to be available. If that shelter space does not exist, that abatement will not occur.
Got it. Yeah, I think those additional details are really critical. So thank you for that. Don't see any other questions on this slide. Go ahead.
All right. So I just want to preface, this is a timeline in a perfect world. We know that sometimes working in government, some things happen, but in a perfect world, this will be our timeline. So last Friday, our ITB was posted, and it closes on the 29th of this month. Emergency cold weather shelters for families will open through Christian Health Associates on October 1st. They are fully funded through Assembly appropriation through the end of this year for sheltering for families. On October 10th, which is the next Assembly meeting, we will bring forward the ITB awards via contracts for approval by the Assembly. We plan to give notice to the campers of the upcoming shelters and which ones are available. The location 1, 2, and 3 are obviously subject to change based on the ITBs and the awards through purchasing. It's our assumption that locations 1 and 2 will open October 15th. Location 3, which we're going to talk about here soon, which is a congregate facility. There are a few things, work orders that need to be completed, mostly for fire safety, fire alarms, and lights. It's our goal to have those finished by October 15th, but if not, that could be delayed. We do plan to work with providers to provide transportation to location 1, 2, and 3. And then, of course, we would like to post a notice of zone abatement on October 15th when shelter becomes available. And it's our goal to start the closure of Third and Ingra encampment on October 26th. In a perfect world.
Thanks. Don't see any questions. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. I hope that if we do get to the point where we're ready, we also loop in and maybe find some overtime for people mover drivers. Do more than one person, as the providers have limited capacity. We have an entire system of big vehicles that have capacity. And so I don't know what, it wouldn't be scheduled service, but some alternative that would be maybe useful.
Through the chair to Mr. Constant, thank you for the suggestion. We'll work to identify that. Next slide, please. So this slide was given, or I created it before we had spoke to the Assembly. So I just want to be clear that ARPA, we believe, is 2.1. ATAX, there is an appropriation coming up on the next Assembly meeting for the transfer of $900,000 and $957,000 that's currently in Anchorage Health Department allocated to specific use for emergency cold weather shelter, but this reappropriation will just put it back into a singular bucket for us to use. And then there's another $2.3 million in emergency cold weather shelter fund that can be made available to Anchorage Health Department for this purpose. So we believe we'll be fully funded for emergency cold weather shelter this season, which is a great place to be. Next slide, please.
Actually, before we move on, I guess just first, don't mean to put you on the spot, Ms. Brawley, but did you want to add anything with regard to the numbers? And I guess while Ms. Brawley is getting prepared, just a couple of remarks from me. So the next several slides are going to deal with congregate shelter. So just a quick note. I'm hoping that we're going to hear some preliminary information today, and maybe even a little bit more than preliminary. I think as community members are very, very curious about what is going to be happening at this site. The Assembly does have a work session scheduled at the request of the mayor for Friday, September 29th from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. in this room on this same topic. So we're going to get some information today, more information on September 29th. My expectation is that we are presented with the full plan and any questions answered at that September 29th meeting. Also, before we get to the congregate shelter, because it might take up the rest of the time, I do have a couple of other issues, including Covenant House and warming areas, just to talk before we start that discussion. But before we do that, turn it over to Ms. Brawley.
Thank you. And this will be very brief. And what I have in front of me is basically a table of the funding sources, just to be clear about what was already appropriated, what's coming up in our meeting on Tuesday that will hopefully be approved. And then I will get that out so we can get it posted, but I just did it. So that's why you don't have it. But essentially, first to say what Ms. Johnson has on the screen there is correct. So just to restate though, the action that was taken at the last meeting was an appropriation of a good chunk of these funds intended for emergency cold weather shelters starting this year and into next winter, and then caring for issues like our fiscal year, which ends December 31st, in different fund sources. So it is a bit complex, but essentially we do have about 2.1 million, so $126,000 and $619.35. That all goes to this broad emergency cold weather shelter, which has multiple components. And so that was already appropriated. There is also repurposed funding that was set aside for the NAV Center or homeless shelter. So we've got a portion of general fund and alcohol tax there, and then a portion of that money, if you remember, 1.3 million was not dedicated to emergency cold weather shelter, but to the Anchorage Affordable Housing and Land Trust as matching funding if and when they have a proposal to, the way they phrased it, buy some vacant and abandoned properties to turn into housing. So that is sitting with the muni until they bring that proposal, but that's a separate piece. So what's left of that is $1,968,315.28. And that's, again, general funding and alcohol tax that goes to that. And then what's on the schedule for Tuesday's meeting is a remainder of basically last year's emergency cold weather shelter funding. So it went to Sullivan operations, a slight amount left over from the RRS contract, Alex Hotel operations, and all of those are specific line items in the budget. So that's why they're being reappropriated, but they essentially were left over from last winter. And that totals $957,137. And that's the alcohol tax up on the screen. And then just to say, there's a couple other pieces. One was removed for Arctic entries, and then there's a about 300,000 piece that we're trying to figure out whether that was spent or what remainder is left. So that will also, if we can figure that out by Tuesday, that will also be in that resolution. But essentially, adding up those totals, and actually let me subtract one of them. So that's about $3,752,000 that we have that has been appropriated and hopefully will be appropriated. So just to say, so there's a couple pieces missing up there, but that's what happened. So it is complex to track, but that's essentially the direction we're moving.
Great, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Branca.
So I've heard so many times that HUD does not pay for shelters, but when I Google it, I don't know what ESG is, but the question is, can a shelter be funded as an emergency shelter under ESG? What is that? It sounds like HUD will. So if you could just clear that up for me.
Through the chair to Ms. Branca, I'd be happy to connect you with CSD over at Anchorage Health Department to give you a full synopsis of ESG funds. They're complicated. Anything HUD related is complicated and complex.
But short answer to what you're asking, though, all of those funds, the ESG funds that we do get, which are very small, they all have been programmed. So there aren't any available ESG funds as far as I understand. Yeah.
And I might.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr.
They
Potts.
effectively use those funds to support the services that get people out of shelters into housing. They literally don't fund a daily bed rate for shelter. So when you hear it funds shelter, that's not what it does. It funds to get people out of shelter because shelter is a failure. It's the last leg before people disappear and die, I guess. And so unless we find a pathway out, and so, or go to jail and prison. So I look forward to the briefing that you can provide on the details of how these funds work.
Great, thanks. All right, so before we get to congregate shelter, a couple of questions. So Covenant House, so I have been in discussions with the Anchorage Health Department about Covenant House, and I'm wondering if you might be able to just speak to that.
Yeah, through the chair to Mr. Rivera, Covenant House each winter offers up 25 additional beds. That cost is $200,000 per quarter. And so it's our assumption, as well as I'm assuming yours, to put that forward on the next assembly agenda for approval. So 200,000 would go to emergency cold weather sheltering for Covenant House and their youth facility.
Thanks, yeah, so expect to see that item on the on the addendum for September 26th. Then warming areas, that was something that the health department talked about earlier in prior iterations. Has the health department considered standing up any possible warming areas?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, not at this time. We have not identified any facilities that we would stand up at this time. We believe because we have enough beds available, we'd like to, offer not just a warming area, but a facility where people can sleep and store and lock their stuff. So if that need arises, that's something we can work on.
Got it. Thanks for that information. Not seeing any other questions. Let's go ahead and move on to congregate shelter.
All right. So at last Tuesday's assembly meeting, a resolution was passed to explore the use of the Solid Waste Services Administrative Building. That building is available and it would meet the need of a congregate location. Currently, the facility is undergoing fire inspection. We did receive the initial fire report back. There's a few basic things that need to be fixed before it is opened, but can open under fire watch, and some of the fire mitigation efforts can happen while it's being occupied. We believe that, not pending any large health, life, and safety disqualifiers, that we will move forward with looking at this facility for a very small congregate location. The assembly and code said that we could authorize this facility for use of up to 150 people. We do not believe the need is that high, but we would like to continue at a max of 150 people for the site. This facility would operate as a walk-up low barrier shelter with navigation services on site, and would navigate and refer people to non-congregate sites like we've seen historically at the Sullivan Arena. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Voland?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you know yet who would provide those navigation services?
Through the chair, historically at Sullivan Arena, we've seen South Central Foundation, Mountain View Health Services, Catholic Social Services. We've had a number of great partners that come in and work with their specific clients on the footprint of the shelter.
Okay, thanks.
Next slide, please. So one of the questions that was asked during the last assembly meeting on the resolution was, does this pass the clean slate muster? This is not a year-round facility or an identified year-round facility, but we did want to cross-examine it with this. It does meet the square foot minimums for per person occupancy. The condition is fair and good. The first floor of this facility is ADA, but we believe with two other non-congregate facilities that we'll be able to move ADA needs to other facilities and to not have any necessity at this footprint in the long term. It is not nearby a school or a playground. Transportation we'll talk about on the next slide. And then it passes residential, which is not part of the clean slate strategy, but we do want to talk about that. It is not zoned properly under clean slate. Clean slate requires a Parklands PLI or a B3. This is an I5. And so under a Title 16 declaration, when it gets cold out, or when the health department director waives Title 16 or the mayor declares an emergency, zoning is waived. And so once Title 16, once it gets cold enough outside, zoning kind of goes out the window. And so unfortunately, it doesn't pass the long-term test, but in the winter it will.
Great. Thanks. You actually answered one of my questions about the length. So, and I just want to confirm. So the Anchorage Health Department and the administration are looking at using this facility simply for the winter and possibly closing it on April 30?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, our initial assumption is that we would just be using this for emergency cold weather shelter. SWS has stated that they would go into a short-term, long-term lease, something of the nature of 1 full year or 2 full years if we were interested. And then the conversation of maintaining a very small shelter site for highly vulnerable people for next summer hasn't occurred yet. And obviously hasn't been brought before the body, but that's something we'd look into if that was the will.
Got it. Thanks. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, and I had some outreach by an unnamed member of the administration to discuss the possibility of a zoning update that would change, not dramatically, but significantly in some ways, a zoning allowance for shelters. And so there may be a conversation coming up in the not too distant future for the body to consider that.
Mr. Villand?
Thank you. I think this is really important, and I think I'll just say for me personally, I'm would be interested in exploring this both as emergency winter shelter, but also as more stable, permanent or semi-permanent low barrier shelter, because I think we've seen the pattern that happens historically with the winter. If people have to leave shelter and then they go back in the, we need something that exists beyond this. I'll just say with the zoning thing, it's interesting. I think we all just need to be mindful of the stated purpose in Title 21 of zoning. And it's not for exclusionary purposes or keeping people out of certain parts of our city or neighborhood. Zoning really should be, in my perspective, about protecting life, health, and safety. So I would be interested, I guess, in knowing a little bit more about what maybe some of the surrounding uses are, because I think this is kind of currently zoned for like a high industrial. And when Euclidean zoning was first thought of, the purpose was to separate residential, people who are living in tenements from industrial uses, factories, things that could give them lung problems, et cetera. So definitely interested, want to keep this conversation going, but want to make sure that if we're considering a rezone, that we're also considering the life, health, and safety, not only of surrounding neighbors, but the people that would be in this facility. Thanks.
Next slide, please. All right, so this is a bird's eye view of the facility. The SWS admin building is the red dot. The current fence that exists is the orange, and then we plan to add fencing to the back of the facility to kind of separate it from the transfer station. And there's some fuel drums, or I shouldn't say drums, tanks back there, some vehicles. We'd like to just make the footprint smaller. And then the 3 little recycle bins are our new SWS facility that was just built. So next slide, please. So the question always comes up is, how far are your neighbors away from this facility? We know that with Sullivan Arena, the residential neighborhoods were very close and there was a negative impact. So there are 5 major residential areas surrounding the old admin building. We did some lightsaber work over here to see the distances and the colors. And then 2 of the residential neighborhoods are across an 8-lane highway. That's the yellow and the green line. And then the purple line that you see is separated by Campbell Creek. Other than that, the blue line is separated by a major thoroughfare, which is Dowling. And then the red line is separated by another thoroughfare. So pretty far away from any residential neighborhoods.
It's good to see there's only one Sith.
Another question that arose was the nearest bus stop. We did a distance measurement. It's about 1,000 feet, and it is on Old Seward and 56th Avenue. As you can see in the larger photo, or the one on the left, this is the main walkway. Residents will have to cross the street over 56th Avenue to get onto the side path or the bike path. And then they'll walk down all the way to Old Seward, and then they'll have to cross back over 56 to get to the bus stop. Next slide, please. So these are some photos of inside the building. Our plan, at least initially, depending on the size of the population in the shelter, would be to utilize the large bays for shelter beds and tote storage. The private offices that are in the facility would be used for intake and navigation. And then there are some large spaces that we want to utilize for dining and food service. Next slide, please. So this is the front entry of the building. One of the things that I really like about it is that it is safe and secure, and it's not conducive for loitering or predatory behavior. It's very small, and once someone walks into the facility, they'll be escorted into a wing that's kind of closed off from outside population. We saw a lot of foot traffic of non-users of the Sullivan Arena hanging around the Sullivan Arena, doing not so nice behavior with residents of the facility. And so it's kind of a great layout for people to enter into the facility and then not be bothered by predatory behavior. The outside of the facility has a large fenced-in outdoor space for outdoor activities. We kind of last year had usage of the outdoor facility for pets, and that's one thing that this is really conducive for, is like letting pets outside. We do plan to have a small space for people who want to bring their pets in with them to seek shelter. And then that green little facility over there has been historically used for smoking, and so we'd like to continue that usage. And then there's locker room space available within the facility.
Thanks. Before we move on, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. I had a brief question about the site overall. So as I understand it, there's the admin building, there's multiple parcels that has been the transfer station. So we're talking about the administration building. Has there been discussion, because I know Solid Waste Services is looking at potential other tenants for those other spaces, not necessarily this one. Has there been discussion about how to adequately separate or secure those other areas, just knowing that it's open spaces, it's that big kind of industrial building, and it's, you know, it's not great to have people accessing that site, and then for other potential tenants, they would, I assume, want controlled access. So I don't know if you've gotten that far.
Yeah, if we could go back 2 slides to the one with the orange and pink fencing. Perfect. So the admin building and the bays that you'll see with the big garage doors, those are all on that footprint. We plan to secure the entire footprint. So it's just that building, just the outdoor fenced in area and the parking lot. North of that is the old transfer station. There's a lot of loading and unloading of trucks. And then to the left, that's Chugach Electric parcels. And so everything will be fenced off and secured just on that very small footprint and parcel.
Thanks. I just wanted to be clear because I know that is a big site, but I know the intent, it sounds like the intent is not to use the entire site for this. Thanks.
Correct. Thank you. All right. So men and women's bathrooms are fully functional in the facility, and there are 3 showers on site. There's also 2 small kitchens in the building to allow for personal warming of food. These kitchens will not be utilized for the daily food service, which is required under the contract for 3 meals a day. This is not a commercial kitchen. It's more so just a community kitchen for people if they want to warm up cereal or oatmeal or noodles or something. So they will not be used commercially. And then there is an upstairs carpeted large indoor space. What we have a vision for is like a TV room, engagement room, where people can hang out during the day, and so they're not outside loitering and out in the cold. And that is it for our initial presentation. We'll have more information on the 29th.
Great. So I have myself in the queue. And again, understanding that you're going to have more on the 29th. So feel free to just let me know. So do we have a sense yet of the cost of running this facility? So since this is an SWS facility, I imagine that they would lease it to the municipality. There'd probably be utilities cost and then whatever it costs per person per bed. Do we have a rough sense of what that might be?
Through the chair, we're still in negotiations for a lease with SWS. We believe with historic non-congregate cost and the cost of the lease that will still be well under the $100 per person per day.
Thanks. And then, so look forward to more on that on the 29th. Second question is around mitigation. So I think you've described a little bit about how you're going to be securing the site. Has the health department thought about any other mitigation measures?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, we haven't identified any specific mitigation efforts. We do know that with a smaller footprint, mitigation will be smaller. And so we'll work with APD and Parks and Rec to keep the facility clean like we did at Sullivan Arena.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, I'll look forward to more on the 29th on that. Okay, that's it for me. Any other questions on this? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Yeah, just, I want this location to work successfully if it can. And my only two thoughts or my two concerns are not only just the cost of conversion to a low congregate shelter, but I believe that building and that structure is the long-term plan for solid waste services. I think that they had some, so then there's going to be a cost to convert it back. So if we have to remove the shop equipment and fill in, or we're doing some sort of safety mitigation around the oil separators, the compressors, those kind of things, because we can't just leave it as an industrial, an industrial application, it'll have to be removed. And then there'll be a cost on the other side to put it back into service at some point, because it is intended to be a heavy equipment shop, if that is in fact what they intend to use it for in the scope of the long term. And the other is just going back to the location with I-5 zoning, is that there is hazardous chemical storage in the immediate vicinity. You talked about fuel stinks, but that's where they do freon extraction. That's where they do a lot of stuff. So I guess my other concern is when we bring that element in, the reason we have separation with zoning for industrial uses to protect the public. And so, it's great that we put in a fence, but I'm kind of curious about the long-term safeguards. We're increasing foot traffic in the area. There's heavy equipment. It's going to be during the winter when it's cold, when visibility is minimal. And so how do we make sure those safeguards are there, considering large equipment with large blind sites, people on the streets, and increasing the traffic, as well as individuals that may migrate off the site into the properties around it, and what does that security look like, and just make sure that we take safety into consideration. As Ron can probably tell you, his property's been broken into regularly, and so you understand that there may be that when desperate individuals are looking for opportunities, they may explore into the surrounding real estate. And so how are we preventing anybody from getting harmed in that process? So thank you.
Through the chair to Mr. Cross, I completely agree. I will just say that foot traffic is something that we constantly deal with in this population, and it's not just at this 56th Avenue location. Sullivan Arena, we have 360 people that were attempting to cross both C Street, A Street, and the new Seward Highway. And so foot traffic is always something that's top of mind. And I will look into long-term safeguards and how to convert this back. In the near term, I think there is agreement that they are willing to do the work and help us do the work to shelter people here through winter.
Thanks. Any other questions? Okay, I'm sure we'll have another robust discussion on the 29th. With that, I just really want to thank the health department for your work on this. And looking like we are going to have an emergency cold weather shelter plan that's going to be turned on in a matter of weeks, and really appreciate the focus on non-congregate space and using that as a primary strategy, and just all of the work that you've done. So thank you so much. All right, so with that, we have one other topic on our agenda. Is Ms. Hayes here? Can you come on up, please? Sure. Wonderful. Before we get to that topic, though, I just want a show of hands, and if you're hiding behind the column, I can't see you. Show of hands of folks who want to participate in final audience participation, just so I can. To Mr. Oliva, you've already participated, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So I will make sure that we have 12 minutes. We might, at this rate, we're probably going to have to extend the meeting just a little bit. Okay, so with that, pull up my notes. So after years of advocacy by Assembly members, the Golden Lion has finally been turned on as housing earlier this year. So very curious to see how things are going. We have some news reports that things are going very well, but we do have the operator here, Henning, here to tell us more. So Ms. Hayes.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon by now, I think it is. So I guess I'll just start with saying that it's going extremely well. We expected a lot of bumps, with opening a new place, and we had to turn it on fast. And so, mentally we were prepared, so we were able to really jump in. So we opened up on, August 1st? And I can say that we are completely full. So we have 80 rooms rented out. We have about 75% of the rooms that are being paid by other agencies, and about 25% self-pay. but everybody has a lease in their own name. Leases are annual or monthly. We wanted to have to give flexibility in case somebody had an opportunity to go to a more permanent solution. So that's been working really well. So what I do is I meet with the health department every 2 weeks. And so I kind of just brought a template to just to kind of let you guys know what we talk about every 2 weeks. And that is, so we go over the vacancy, the occupancy. And so, like I said, we are full. Incidents, we've had very few incidents. We've had 4 APD calls. 3 of them were initiated by the tenants. I won't say why because it's personal to them, but it was tenant initiated. And then I let Miss Johnson know last week somebody had stolen a vehicle and they ditched it in the parking lot. And there was no way of knowing if it was one of our tenants or if somebody just said, hey, let's just take it to the Golden Lion parking lot. So if y'all drove by last week and saw like 4 cop cars there, that's why it was. But they went and talked to all the tenants and that they didn't make any arrests or anything. Sorry. And we've had no complaints by neighborhoods, the surrounding neighborhoods, which is really nice. What I did in preparation to us occupying the building is I reached out to the neighboring community councils and I had sent them a copy of our Good Neighbor Plan. I think I sent it to you guys as well. We did a few tweaks in between that. So I went to a Tudor Community Council meeting where I saw Mr. Rivera. Going to Rogers Park Community Council, I'm going to present to them. But I did have, we did talk to them before we moved in, Rogers Park, to say, hey, we're coming. We've talked to the churches in the neighborhood. We've talked to Geneva Woods Community Council. So we really wanted to get out there in front and say, hey, we're coming. You know, this is how you can contact us. And it has the property manager's phone number, our deputy's number, our operations director, and my number and emails, right? So if there's a concern, they can email or call right away. And then we started a text thread with the Jewish Community Center across the street because there were, they had concerns because there's a daycare there, a daycare center there. So I said, hey, these are our numbers. We'll have a text line. If there are any concerns, let us know. And we haven't heard from anybody, which is really good. Then we talk about maintenance because we moved in there pretty quickly and there are maintenance issues there as they're doing the awning and, you know, the building hadn't been operational for about 3 years. So we have a part-time maintenance man on who has years of maintenance experience. There has been some leaking in the rooms. There's been just minor room repairs. Hey, my door doesn't lock or, you know, things like that have been addressed right away. So as far as the property itself, so what we're doing in the building is Anchorage Neighborhood Health Center is coming every week to do the triage assessments, referrals, and that. We have, it sounds funny, but we have like bingo on Fridays. We have, you know, little things that we do because what we really wanted to do was give people an opportunity to stay in and be entertained rather than maybe choosing to go outside and loiter or hang out, you know, things like that. So those are going really well. Beans Cafe is in the process of becoming eligible to accept SNAP benefits for meals. And so what they're going to do is we're giving them a small space on the first floor where they can come in and they can, you know, so if somebody wants to order meals for the next day and they can pay for with their SNAP card, which is pretty cool. But we also have a small like commissary store where we'll sell like, you know, little things if they want to buy something to eat. And then we also set up a small food pantry in case somebody doesn't have any means to, you know, buy food. Then we have like shelf stable things that they can choose from. I think that's all that I've got. If you guys have any questions.
Great, thanks. So I'm in the queue and then other members can get in the queue. So it sounds to me like things are going really well at the facility, which I appreciate. The clients that you are serving, it sounds like they're fairly stable. Have you had to deal with any evictions?
No, sir, we have not had to deal with any evictions. We are being very, we're being very graceful, and that was our intent, right? Is because, I mean, if, you know, we're not going to have somebody come in that has been homeless, you know, experiencing challenges for a long time and say, hey, now this is what you need to do. And there's no grace in that, right? We would probably evict a lot of people. So yeah, no, we have not evicted. One challenge that we have, and it's because, like I said earlier, that about 75% of the tenants have their rent paid by another agency. And so we don't get like the lump sum of rent on the first. It trickles in, right, for their check runs and that. So we would never like evict somebody because they were like late on their rent. We've got like a few people, a few tenants that have, we're experiencing challenges with them, right? But we just show a lot of grace. We loop in their case managers and say, hey, you know, this person's having a rough time. Can you please, you know, come and help them? We've had one tenant that like has soiled his mattress. So like we bought him a new mattress. We're being very, very graceful.
Thanks. I'll go to you, Mr. Constant.
Thanks. So there was a lot of conversation about the cost, the rental, the amount. What are you finding are the sources of rent for your clients, your tenants?
Yeah, so they're coming from the housing stabilization funds from the other agencies. We have like the 4As has a rental reserve fund and they're paying for a few people to live there. Neighbor Works, their stabilization program. We're not taking emergency housing vouchers because there has to be a community kitchen, or they either have to have a kitchenette or they have to have access to a community kitchen. And there is a commercial kitchen in the Golden Lion, but we got a quote of like almost like $100,000 to do some repairs, and we just don't have the budget for something like that. So, and then the other 25% self-pay, they get Social Security, you know, they get some kind of funding, and that is above and beyond the 800 to where they're comfortably able to pay the rent. And we anticipate, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. So what source of funds were you saying require that they have a kitchen or kitchenette?
Emergency housing vouchers through HUD.
So I think it probably on our end is something worth looking at, figuring out the delta. What is the improvement that needs to happen to meet that? Because that again is that form of permanent sustainable funding. And so if there is a capital outlay that needs to happen, that might be something as a substantial element of the building that's ours, we own the building, that we can figure out to make sure that this project continues to pencil for the long term. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions. Okay, so then moving on to committee legislative and budget priorities, just briefly, I have been putting some thoughts to paper for both the November budget and the legislative program. I'm going to be sharing some legislative program ideas at the legislative committee meeting tomorrow. And then at some point, you'll probably hear more about some budget ideas. With that, that takes us to final audience participation. I'm going to go ahead and ask for a motion to extend by 10 minutes so we can accommodate everyone. If I can get a motion.
Move to extend 10 minutes.
Thanks. And is there any opposition? Make it easy. All right, seeing no opposition, then we are extended by 10 minutes. Okay, so with that, just like I did at the beginning, I'll have my timer for 3 minutes. I'll pause at the 30-second mark. So we have a chair set up here in the front. Just make sure the mic's turned on. There were 4 folks, so whoever wants to come up first. more time.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Sullivan. I'm a service provider here in Anchorage. I'm here today to speak about the importance of investing in permanent supportive housing for the homeless. As a service provider going on 8 years, I've seen firsthand the devastating effects of the homeless on individuals, families, and our community as a whole. Shelters are necessary stopgap measure, but they're not the long-term solution to homelessness. In fact, studies have shown that warehousing the homelessness in shelters can almost cost past taxpayers more in the long run due to the increased use of emergency services and other public resources. Permanent supportive housing, on the other hand, is proven evidence-based solution to homelessness. It combines affordable housing with wraparound services such as case management, mental health, and addiction treatment and job training. This helps people to address the root causes of their homelessness and achieve self-sufficiency. In Anchorage, we have a unique opportunity to address the homeless crisis by remodeling abandoned and vacant properties. This would be a cost-effective way to create permanent supportive housing for families and vulnerable populations. According to a recent study by the Coalition to End Homelessness, there are over 31 homeless individuals in Anchorage on any given night. At the same time, there's over 1,000 abandoned and vacant properties in the cities. If we were just to remodel a fraction of these abandoned properties, we could create hundreds of new units in permanent supportive housing. This would save taxpayers millions of dollars of money in the long run by reducing the need for emergency services and other public resources. My agency, Outreaching Lives, has launched a program into 2019, and we did just that. We're working with the city and the municipality to identify and remodel abandoned properties for the homeless. We're also providing wraparound service to our clients, such as case management, mental health, addiction treatment, and job training. Our program has been very successful in reducing crime and saving taxpayers dollars. For example, one of our residents who was housed at the Sullivan Arena, after entering our program, he's now working 2 full-time jobs, has purchased a vehicle, and is on track to purchase a fourplex. He's been sober for over a year now and has not been arrested. This is just one example of how permanent supportive housing can transform lives. I urge you to invest in supportive housing for the homeless. It is the most cost-effective and effective and humane way to address the homelessness crisis. A study with the National Alliance to End Homelessness found that permanent supportive housing saves taxpayers.
Sean, just letting you know you got 30 seconds left.
Okay. An average of $4,000 per year. A study by the Corporation of Supportive Housing Fund that people who exit homelessness into permanent supportive housing are more likely to stay housed and less likely to return to homeless than those who exit other types of housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thank you, Sean. So previously we had discussed you had some development opportunities around outreach work and community engagement. And I received a communication, I'm not sure where, recently about a program that I didn't recognize, but it was parallel to a program that I did recognize, which is called Urban Alchemy. Are you aware of that program?
No, not at all.
So Urban Alchemy is an organization that, Urban Alchemy is an organization that's kind of starting to show up in a number of cities, which is a program that's doing a really good job of putting individuals who've come through the homeless experience and are back on their feet, creating an outreach program that actually works to go right back to help the individuals who are still on the street. And so for members of the body, it's a missing piece in our system, which is a way to really effectively transform individuals into assets who have been through this that you and I or none of us could ever really provide the help in a certain way. So I want us to begin exploring that, which I think, even if you don't know that specific program, I think you've been pushing me on that for probably 2 years now.
Yeah.
And so I've heard you, and I just know there's a conversation starting to brew.
Nice. Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Sean, you're absolutely right regarding the vacant and abandoned properties. Tomorrow is a Community and Economic Development Committee meeting at 9 a.m. at the Permit Center. We've been discussing this many times about how do we revitalize some of these properties, because it allows us to add housing also without affecting the density of residential neighborhoods.
Yes.
And the other thing on that is that I'm doing some research and studying other cities around the United States that I've discovered that there's a growing what's called a rehab code, which is a lower code, because right now under Title 21, if you do under a certain percentage of improvements to a property, you got to bring the whole property up, which is a burden.
Yes.
Sometimes I can't, at that point, it makes it economically not viable.
True.
So, but we're working on all that. So I really appreciate you speaking today.
All
Thank
right.
you.
I'd like to attend that meeting tomorrow too.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Yeah, whoever. I'll go ahead. And then I'll go ahead and invite whoever the other two individuals are. There's a couple seats in the front. So if you just want to take a seat in the front, that way you can just make the transition easy. All right, I'll set your timer. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Chris Stoner. I'm president of Midtown Community Council. I was not prepared to talk today, but some things have happened this morning just to rile everybody up in Midtown. I received an email this morning that we are supposed to pick a site for 150 people for low barrier shelter in Midtown. And we're supposed to do this within the next couple of days. That means we have to have an emergency meeting. That means we have to get people together. That means we have to figure out what we're going to do. And we don't know what we're going to do. Midtown has been creamed this year. We had $1 million worth of damage from April to the 1st of July that we can document. And if you go from July to now, it's at least another $500,000. This is in theft. This is in feces being put on buildings. This is on rocks being thrown on $20,000 windows. And now the city is asking us for some more. Before anything else happens with any shelters, we would like to see a plan for mitigation. And a plan means you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things are going to happen and how they're going to be paid for. If you put in the station near the garbage center, that is surrounded by small businesses. It's a couple blocks out of our boundaries, but people will move into our boundaries because that's just normal. These are small businesses. They're owned by mom and pop. One of them is mine. It's a family-owned business. We don't make a lot of money. Then every time we get hit, it's money down the tube, down the tube, down the tube, down the tube. You guys know me. I have advocated for the homeless all summer. I've also advocated for our community. And what I don't hear in here is advocating for community. I feel many days I'm split in half. I'm out at the camp, I see things happening, I write an email, please do this, please do that, get us water, get us outhouses, get us hands, get us this, get us that. These are basic things for human beings. On the other side, I deal with people in our community council every day. They're being devastated by the homeless community. I don't know what to do. I just am appalled at the idea of another 150 people being put in Midtown in a low barrier shelter. I don't make the decisions. I'm very uncomfortable with what is happening in our area. This is the third time in the last couple of years.
Chris, just want to let you know you have
Okay,
30
thank
seconds
you.
left.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody's really clear. Nobody is asking the community councils to pick a site. The role of a community council is to provide input and advice to the assembly, not to make formal decisions. It is not the authority of a community council to set policy.
Thanks. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Eric Glad. I live in District 1. I'm here on my own behalf. I'm just going to reiterate a point I made during the last assembly meeting. This is not a legal argument. I realize the municipal code, the provisions for emergency shelter plan only obligate the muni to relax certain zoning restrictions and then obligate the health department to develop and maintain a database of would-be shelter providers. Nevertheless, a lot of the conversation about planning is under the rubric of emergency cold weather shelter plans. It feels to me like there's an attempt to tie the two together. So again, it's not a legal argument, but to the extent a lot of these plans are meant to address the obligations of the municipality to have an emergency shelter plan, I want to point out a couple things. One, again, spending an inadequate amount of money to meet the community's needs is better than not spending any money whatsoever, but it does not make it adequate. Similarly, being ahead of prior year schedules to have a plan in place that's less late than in prior years doesn't make it on time. The emergency shelter plan should already be in place. And finally, I just would point out about the organization that Chair Constant referenced, Urban Alchemy. It would probably behoove you to look into their feedback, particularly among people who've been under their control in cities where they have a contract. They have a very problematic reputation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Constant?
So of organizations that are run by similar kind of programs, do you have any other names? Because I have a few.
I don't, but I'd be happy to try to help develop a list of some that have
Great. Yeah,
more stellar reputations.
because it's not so much about the organization, but the service, which is a pathway to employment and a pathway to help get people out of the streets.
Oh, I agree. I think in principle, what they represent and how they market themselves makes a lot of sense. It's just that particular organization has got some pretty problematic feedback.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and I think we have one more. All right, welcome.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm Ken McCarty from District 2, Eagle River Chugiak, former trustee of the Mental Health Trust, former legislator. And there's a couple things I want to ask questions about that I wrote down. One is, what has been the interaction with our federal delegation regarding the federal mandates which inhibit viable housing based on numbers in residents? So in a task force meeting, by the way, I'm also on the task force of homelessness here, that it was brought up by the coalition that we can't put people into housing because the number that they allot for limits. So maybe there's a house or an apartment or a facility available and a family of 4 or 5, but yet feds say there can only be 4 in there. So they're making people homeless when we do have viable housing options. I brought this up to Senator Sullivan. I'm not sure what's been done by all of you in talking to the delegation and those entities involved. Second question is, what is the status of the J-Bear portable units to be available as an option? It is my understanding that the portable units can house 14 people with restroom and a common kitchenette type thing. I've actually seen them on the Glen, and they're traveling somewhere, just 1 or 2 units, but I'm not sure what's being done regarding those portable units there. Third question is, what is the viability to offer transportation accessibility to those who wish to return to the village or state of origin? What is also the availability to secure identification to those wanting to pass through TSA to go to those sites? So I deal with people who are incarcerated, people, the homeless sites, and one of the themes is they like to leave, but they can't leave because they don't have the money, or they can't leave because they don't have identification. And I know in those that are incarcerated, there's been improvements so that they could get their identification rapidly before they are released. So what are we doing in those avenues there? Thank you very much for your time. Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't see any questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome. So you will be our last speaker, and then we will have to adjourn.
Thank you. My name is Apollo Naff, and I currently am homeless. I've been homeless since my eviction in 2022, March. I used to have a profitable business here, the Bubbly Mermaid Champagne and Oyster Bar, and I now currently represent about 20 campers, those individuals that are living in their cars, RVs, trailers, things like that. So we are curious to know, what is the plan for people that are living, say, with cats and dogs, and then these are people that won't go for the hotel rooms because I'm pretty sure they're all, to start off with, booked up. We're also a little bit more stable. We can't qualify for housing, but we're not going to freeze to death. Is there a plan for campers, or are we just going to Home Depot and bothering other private businesses?
Thank you for that question. We don't do back and forth, but I appreciate
First time
that.
here.
Yeah,
But I've been working on trying to work on solutions anyways. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any questions. Thank you for that. All right, with that, this meeting is adjourned.